Thank you, Tony, and to Mike and to Matt and everyone here at KeyCode, thank you. My name is Evonne Heyning. As Tony mentioned, I am a social producer, so I focus on integration between social media and live events, broadcast, and looking at how all of these pieces fit together in the transmedia landscape. So I'm going to speak a little bit around strategy today, more so than around the technical aspects, because we're going to have some fantastic speakers afterward who are going to speak to more of the how to get it done. So I come from a public sector background. I've worked both in media, nonprofits, government, and education, and I've spent a lot of time helping people design their communities. And so thinking about engagement is one of the primary things that I do with my clients. It's starting usually very early on at the stage of like identifying who the audience is and what you want them to do together. And I like the image of a mountain and taking a journey up the mountain as a way to frame this, because it begins to start to make sense, all of the steps you have to go through in order to prepare not only your producers and the people in the room, but also your community for the type of engagement that you want to drive. So what we're talking about here is a huge paradigm shift, right? So there was the old way of doing television, of doing broadcast, everyone around a single thing. It was passive, everyone was being pushed, basically. We have moved into pull media, right? So everyone gets to pull in the kind of content they want that's right for them at the moment, and it's interactive. We expect interactivity out of our programming at this stage. And so if you're working with producers that don't understand interactivity, being the voice in the room that says, okay, how are we engaging the audience? How do we want people to play along with us, right? Because there's lots of different ways to play. It can be a second screen app, it can be social media play, it can be some combination that uses the web, that can use digital media, that can also integrate what's happening at the live experience as well. I would love to see just a show of hands of what different roles we have in the room. How many of you are sort of in the production room when it comes time to get a show to air? Okay. How many of you are producers in one form or another? All right. And I would love to hear just a shout out. What are some of the other roles that we have here? For those of you who didn't raise your hands, what is it that you spend most of your time doing currently?
Writing.
A lot of writing, okay. All right. So there is that sense of in this room, there are the people who bring together all of these pieces, right? So there is a technology component, there is a writing and programming component, and then there is the how do you build a team around these things so that you can be effective. Because at the end of the day, you want people to really get excited about what you're doing and want to play along in one form or another. So right now, we're looking at deep social media saturation when it comes to the basics, Twitter. That's number one. That's what people most see on screen currently. 70% of social media interaction is done via mobile devices, in the sense that they're sitting right there in front of their screen, either with their phone or their tablet. And so designing for that really easy use is where we've been trying to work with broadcasters. Now, this has some pretty interesting numbers as far as what types of things people like to do while they're watching television. So some of it's shopping, some of it's being able to look up information that's relevant. So if you want people to learn more about something that you're discussing in a show, for instance, being able to give them a way to get to that information. Certainly participating in some sort of social networking site. You know, it could be a chat room if there's a new series coming out, that sort of thing. But also getting deals, shopping, those sorts of things are also drivers. Now, Twitter is definitely still driving social TV, but we're seeing more and more that it's not really about Twitter anymore. It's certainly Instagram as well. We're seeing a lot of traffic in that space. And as we begin to think about how to integrate things like Instagram into broadcast, there are still very few tools that do that well. And so there's a handful of challenges that we hit when it comes to the engagement side. Here's some of the other content that you can weave in. So most of us think of participation in a pretty narrow way. We think about give people a hashtag, ask a question, drive very simple types of engagement. But we can do a lot of deep engagement, and it can be done lots of different ways. It can use sites like YouTube or Pinterest. It can use writing. It can use lots of different types of content that most programmers aren't currently tapping into. Your audiences are using Instagram. Your audiences are using sites like Snapchat. And you can think about how are you integrating that into your show as part of it. This is where we are going. So what I want you to focus on is actually the pink at the top, which is creators. Creators publish web pages, write blogs, upload videos. These are the people who are most actively engaged and are going to give you great content if you ask for it. If you notice, they're young. It used to be that they would say that, oh, maybe 1 in 10 is a content creator, but you'll see it's more like 30 to 40% of the younger audiences are content creators, and they want to create with you. So it's not just about like putting some user-generated content on your website anymore. They want to create with you. That's why Minecraft is so huge. They want the opportunity to add to the narrative that you're creating. So you still have spectators, you still have joiners who just want to be the more passive receivers, but you have a lot of people who are doing these more active things, like either leaving a comment, sharing something and really getting it out there for you, but also creating content around what you're doing, sort of building the fan culture around it. And you really want to spark that fan culture as a way to build engagement. There are a lot of different ways you can invite participation. So asking people to publish something about what you're discussing is one way to go. But you can also just solicit Instagrams. You can put a hashtag out and say, hey, we would love to see your selfies about health, and see what comes in. Twitter, certainly, photos, blogs, all these things are useful. Most times they're still being used in a really light way. So if you watch most programming, they're not asking hard questions of the audience. They're asking very simple questions because that keeps the bar low. But at any given time, you can decide to make the bar deeper and wider and more interesting. So this is a more full feedback loop. Most media is going to stop up here at the story and the inquiry. So if you watch most series, they're going to tell a story, but they're not necessarily going to drive any sort of challenge to the audience. We're starting to see more shows that are saying, you know what, we want you to solve a problem together. We want you to help us in one way or another. Not just vote on your favorite American Idol, but we want you to do something with us. We want you to help solve a problem. And this is where we begin to see a shift in the model. So it's no longer, again, about passive participation, but really about active participation. So you can begin to think about something like the X Prize. So are most of you familiar with the X Prize and what they do? So the X Prize, based here in LA, they put out big challenges to the public to say, we're going to get a rover going on the moon. There's a $10 million prize. We want you to participate and create something together. This is being done on large scale for big challenges. It's not being done on a small scale yet, but it will be, right? So if you're looking at, for instance, solving for moving logistics after a tsunami in the Philippines, that is something that you can empower your audience to help you with. Right now, we're not seeing that full participation loop, but these are ways that you can begin to invite participation in new ways and be a trailblazer as far as opening the door to new types of engagement. So putting challenges out there, encouraging your audience to discover solutions together, to collaborate, to find each other. There are all sorts of ways that this could be gamified as well. And there's a lot of different ways that this could be connected to your second screen apps or to your social media to drive engagement. And this is sort of how it fits with your whole ecosystem. We need a whole system in order to tell robust stories. So it's not just about the media companies anymore. It's about working with the nonprofits and the foundations that are doing interesting work. It's about including government. But it's especially about including the audience and giving them an opportunity to do something new, right? If you give them a way to participate that says, oh, wow, you're valuable too. We want to hear what you have to say. That opens the door to being much more bonded to whatever experience you're creating for them. So how do you get there? How do you start to ascend the mountain? And how do you bring along your audience with you so that they don't get lost along the way? There's a number of different preparation pieces that we do with clients when it comes to creating a social broadcast of any type, whether it's a live event or something that's going to stream or something that's straight for television. Number one, it's being in a state of inquiry, asking lots of questions, both of the people in the room as you're starting to plan out your production, but also of all the stakeholders and then of the audience. And so again, it's not about pushing a message out as much as inviting a conversation to exist. And then you can decide where you want that conversation to exist. Is it on Twitter? Is it on Facebook, right? Is it on Reddit? Is it on YouTube? Is it all of the above? Do you have the right people to man each of those channels? Because if you're using 4 or 5 social channels to try and drive engagement, you need a person on each of them making sure that things don't go off the rails, because they do a lot. Whether especially on YouTube, in the comment bar, Reddit, certainly, you need to be able to know that one person on your team is watching each of those channels effectively. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but if you leave that ball without taking care of it, it will bite you later. So design for active engagement. We talked a little bit about this. What does that look like? It means asking questions. Number one, really inviting participation and really thinking about the levels of engagement that you want people to be at. So it's not just voting for your favorite American Idol, although that's a great way to get people in the door. That's kind of at the base of the mountain. That's an easy way to participate. But there are levels beyond that. And you may want to get 10,000 of your core audience to do something bigger, to show up somewhere, or to take an action for you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about providing Sherpas, and particularly the role of the producer as the Sherpa on the mountain, as a way to create a guided experience for people so that they know how to participate and they know where the safe zones are for that. So a little bit about myself. I'm an entrepreneur as well as a producer. I've spent the last 2 years building tools, and specifically tools that connect interactivity and social learning along with media. So the tool I'm building right now, it's called Edify. It takes all of the different types of media out there and helps you piece together learning paths. So I can say, read all of these pieces, watch this video, play this game, go see this expert, take this course, go over to KeyCode Media to that event, maybe go to that meetup. And it becomes a very easy path that you can put on your second screen app or in your mobile device. We've done that in part because we saw that it was very difficult to navigate most of the media content currently out there. Like, you guys are putting out so much great stuff and people don't know how to find it. We have a huge distribution challenge, and we have a huge contextual challenge when it looks at how does all of this media fit together. Right now, your audiences are very confused. They're generally extremely confused on where to go for information about what you're doing. They may know the one slice, the television commercial that leads them to the show, but they don't necessarily know where to go for more information. And those links are not explicit very often. We very rarely drive anything beyond just go to our website or use the hashtag. Again, those are simple ways to get the ball rolling, but there's different layers that you can take people to and get them much more engaged. So choose your party, meaning choose your production team wisely, and really choose your path and figure out what's going to make sense for you in order to get the kind of engagement that you're looking for. And it may be just getting kids to create media with you. Right? These guys are recording a radio show. 10-year-olds can do this. It's not that hard. Most 10-year-olds I've met know how to shoot video now. So if you're not inviting that level of engagement, think about it. Think about how you're starting to invite your audience to say, you know what, we want to see your YouTube videos. We want to see what you're putting out on Instagram as shorts. We want to put your Vines into our broadcast. When it comes to weaving things like Instagrams and Vines, again, it starts to look like this. You've got a lot of different pieces in the backpack, and you have to make some careful choices, otherwise you're never going to make it. You have to figure out which channels are going to be most valuable for you. And it really depends on your audience. If you're going for a very young audience, you're going to want to lean heavily on YouTube. If you're going for an audience over 30, Twitter will be your friend. But you need to really think about who are the people I most want to engage, and then where are they, and then how can I get them to participate most effectively. And that's just the process of packing your backpack well so that you can make it up the mountain. So the role of a Sherpa. Most of you are familiar with Sherpas. Do you know what that term means? Okay, so they're the ones who help take you up the mountain, right? On expedition, this is your best friend. He's the one who's going to keep you from getting killed. It's really good to have one person in every room on every show that knows how to guide you through these processes, who knows what's going to happen when the shit hits the fan, and that knows how to push the emergency button when things go wrong, because they will. With social media, there's a lot that can go wrong, and you want to do a lot of risk management ahead of time, and you want to really protect yourself and make sure you have good guides around you. The technology will guide you somewhat. There are certain things you can automate. You can filter out certain things like dirty words. But there's a lot of things that you can't automate, and so you really have to build a strong team. This is me in my other incarnation. For years, I worked as a professional avatar. So I was an 8-foot-tall green fairy for the government. I worked for the State Department, hosting their live and interactive events as my avatar self. And the undersecretary at the State Department got upset and in a meeting asked me to change my skin color. Yeah. You can imagine how well that went over. I was like, would you ask anyone else to change their skin color? I chose green because Jim Henson had said, well, it's not easy being green. And I wanted to be able to make a statement around transcending race and cultural identity, but it was threatening for people to do that, right? We put ourselves out there in lots of different ways, and right now many of us have many alter egos, and you don't quite know who you're talking to on the other side of social media. It might be a 12-year-old. It might be an 80-year-old. You have no clue who's on the other side of the computer. And so you need to be really clear about, number one, what are the guiding principles? How are you designing for it? And then what are the questions you're asking? Because if you open the door too wide, you're going to get all sorts of crazy. And if you open the door too narrow, you're not going to get the kind of engagement you're looking for. How many of you are using second screen apps in what you're doing right now? A few, yeah, I see a few. Okay, so this is a little bit of a sense of the productivity hype curve when it comes to second screen apps. We are sort of in some of this zone in a way. The peak of inflated expectations is pretty frequent in this space right now. There's a lot of experimentation happening, and there's a lot of opportunities. But there's also a ton of companies in this space. These are the networks connecting to the technology providers, connecting to the middleware and the filters and the brands that all create this ecosystem so that someone can have an app in their hands that helps them shop and buy the clothes that they just saw on girls. Because that app exists, but it happens not necessarily from one company. It happens because many companies got together and figured it out. This is the digital water cooler. Twitter is like the collective stream of consciousness. Social media as a whole is the digital water cooler. And your audience is going to say all sorts of things there that may not be appropriate for you. And you want to figure out, well, how do I take the gems that they're saying and make sure that those get bumped up without getting all of the other noise dragging you down? Because social media is a double-edged sword, and if you don't use it carefully, it will kill you. So be very careful about how you invite in the engagement, but then also how you curate it so that the experience works for people. Culture is context. There are over 50 words I have to filter for when I'm doing social media for broadcast currently. That doesn't exist in other countries. You have to know what you're dealing with and what the rules are from week to week. I've been working with a friend of mine manages Pussy Riot, and so preparing Pussy Riot for their Colbert Report and some of their other events has been happening over the last 2 weeks. And until a couple weeks ago, you couldn't say pussy on television. But now we have a context for saying pussy in a way that is actually relevant. It's uncomfortable for people, and it's provocative, right? But I can't filter for pussy anymore because it doesn't work. I have to be able to bring in the information around that word, which was previously on the list of, you can't talk about this. We're not going to talk about what the UK does. But it's important to look out. It's important to have listening tools at your disposal. So no matter what technology tool you're using, being able to watch the social media conversation and watch what trends are happening, the sentiment, but also look for those really great gems of content, whether it's an Instagram that's just perfect or a Twitter question that actually gets to the point of what you're hoping to go for. You want to make sure you have a place to view what's happening in your community. This is the role of the base camp, right? The post-production room, the control room, these are places where this happens. But it also happens on the web with your audience too, and figuring out how you're staying in conversation with them. Again, it's not just about pushing it out, it's about an ongoing conversation with your audience. So curation. This is one of the biggest challenges when you're dealing with large amounts of social media for broadcast. So there are times where 100,000 messages an hour is normal. And so you need to be able to have tools that allow you to get to the best possible 5,000 to go through and then pick the 50 that you might include in a broadcast. You have to plan ahead and say, okay, I know I'm going to look for 25 Instagrams over the course of this hour. I'm going to do a series of filters for myself. These are some of the activities we do in content curation, right? We aggregate, we bring together everything on a hashtag. We distill and figure out what are the most vital things. We might have a certain search term that we're looking for based on if there's a celebrity that we want to focus on, if there's an issue we want to focus on. And so then we create those filters for ourselves. I primarily do this using Neverknow along with a tool called Tomorrowish, but there's a handful of filtering tools out there, and I recommend that you take a little time, explore that, and I'm happy to talk to you more about what we've used in the past. Elevation is something more like Reddit, being able to vote up or down comments, and then again, you're seeing what your audience is resonating with and what they're responding to and what they're excited about. We do a lot of mashups, and I think there's a lot of room to grow the mashup movement within social media, and particularly figuring out how all of that video content that's being created out there can fit with the programming that you're already creating. And chronology, being able to tell the story not only from one perspective, but from many perspectives. And we do this sometimes by bringing together something like a Storify after a broadcast. So this is Neverknow. This is a tool we used. I think I got this screenshot when we were first doing some of the testing around the healthcare initiative at YouTube a couple of weeks ago. And Neverknow gives me a couple of different dashboards. First, I'm able to see all the content and pick out some of my favorites, bring them to an off-air carousel, and then I'm able to say, okay, I'm gonna pull these 5 over, and I'm gonna rotate them through every 10 seconds on a lower third. So I work that out with the other producers ahead of time. I say, okay, we're gonna do lower thirds in these 5 sections of the show. We're gonna do it for 2 minutes. We're gonna rotate Instagrams every 20 seconds or 10 seconds. I would recommend using at least 10 seconds as your window because it takes people a few seconds to really grasp that there's content and how to receive it. And if you're dealing with something like a tweet, it takes about 10 seconds minimum to really read that. At the same time, you can't give them too much content. In a lower third, 140 characters is really about as much as you can do. At the same time, I can't edit someone's tweets. You can edit Facebook posts, you can edit Instagram posts, but legally you're not allowed to edit people's tweets. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're integrating for broadcast. The rules change depending on which company is providing the content. What we have found in general is that we just don't use the tweets with profanity because yes, you're really not supposed to edit tweets at all. I have not seen an instance of someone actually getting sued for it. And I think if you're dropping off the last 10 to 20 characters, you're probably fine. It's the same way like a retweet. But at the same time, you don't want to change really anything in the character of it, nor do you want them to change how things are flowing.
It's illegal to change a tweet?
You're not supposed to change a tweet in broadcast.
Wow.
Yes.
But Facebook you can, Instagram you can, that's cool?
Mm-hmm. It's just the way the Twitter API is run, and so all the companies that work with the Twitter API will tell you. So for instance, Tomorrowish and Never Know will let you know that you're not supposed to edit tweets. It will come to a head at some point, but for now I'm guessing Twitter is not pushing hard on that. Twitter is still trying to figure out how to integrate well with television, and it's now been 3 years of really active experimentation in the space, but there's a lot more to come. So remember, you as producers, as writers, as people in the control room, you're the Sherpas for the audience. You're the ones guiding their experience. You're the ones inviting them to participate. They're going to get further up the mountain if you help them get there. Otherwise, they're just going to stay at that low-level tweet once in a blue moon action, and that's it. And if you want like strong, deep, extraordinary engagement, you've got to help them get up the mountain. And there's a couple different things that happen once you get them up the mountain, because you're filtering for value at that point. You're starting to bring your community closer to you, and then you're starting to unearth the value in all of your audience. So it's not just about, again, what's happening in the control room. It's not just about what the producers are doing at that phase. James Franco wrote a really interesting story on the art of the selfie. This was in the New York Times. And I like what he was talking about here as far as being adept at interpreting social media. Selfies are one great way that you can begin to see your audience. And you can invite people to submit selfies, feature them, and then you've got a way to really get a sense of what's resonating for people, what are they responding to. If you ask a question, they will answer it and they will share it. It also helps build trust. So if you're finding that your audience is maybe not fully with you, this may be a way to, again, invite people closer to you. So you want to filter for human emotion. This is from the Imagine Dragons show, and the lower thirds there, these were things we were using Instagram and Twitter primarily. And when I was going through, I got probably a couple thousand Instagrams and tweets within the 45 minutes or an hour of that concert. And so it was looking for human emotion, looking for people really excited, right? So you have not only the excitement of the band, but you have the excitement of the audience, and you want them to be able to share that. In the control room, this looks like 2 or 3 of us really at our laptops, just going through the content and then bringing it up into whether it's a lower thirds or a full screen. This was at YouTube, and figuring out, again, we were using Twitter and Facebook to bring in questions for celebrity guests on stage. This was happening very quickly, so we had to be able to turn around something through 3 to 4 steps in about 3 minutes. And make sure that the content was perfect, make sure that nothing was going to go wrong, make sure that there were no curse words in it or anything questionable. In this case, we had to be extremely careful around curation because of the nature of Obamacare, because of the nature of what's happening in that public dialogue. But it doesn't just have to be social media, right? You can invite people to actually do things. And they can send you photos and videos, whatever. It's all about media at some point. But invite people to do things, actually get physically active, because the more they're embodied, the more excited they are to share it. It becomes real to them, right? So it's not just on their phone, it's not just on their television or their laptop. It's something that they're actually feeling and they want to do more with. So here's the levels in the mountain. It starts pretty low. It starts with like just getting people to watch. Maybe use a hashtag. Maybe getting them involved in a little way of saying, hey, share this. We're about to premiere House of Cards. Would you let people know that it's going out on Netflix tomorrow, right? That retweet, really simple action. But you may want to drive collaboration. You may want to drive real partnership as well. The people who are shopping through your second screen apps, they're your partners. They're driving your revenue. At the end of the day, those are the people you want to get more and more engaged because they're already there and they're going to help other people get up the mountain too. So one more time, involving the whole ecosystem. So thinking about your audience as much broader than just the people who are watching, right? It's the companies you're working with, it's the government, it is the nonprofits, it's the foundations, it's the educational institutions. They all have a role to play in what you're creating. And the more you engage them, the more you bring in the experts from all these fields, again, the more you're going to be able to unearth the extraordinary content that's in your community. So this is a little bit about what I'm creating, just to give you background. Learning paths, making it really easy to say, okay, I just watched a great show on the oceans. Where do I go for more information? Well, Jacques Cousteau's son, Jean-Michel, said I should read this book, watch this video, and maybe go have this experience. And I have that on my phone, and I can track through that. Being able to accelerate learning is just one of the ways in which social media can empower your audience to do more with their lives and to create value. You can create value for your audience by combining these tools in new ways. This is some of the other stuff we're doing. So building live interactive theater that brings together the stream, the social media, and also figuring out how do you get people playing together in real ways. So we're building things out in the immersive dome at Vortex to play with 360 immersion connected to social media and play for all ages. And then we're also doing this out in the world with gaming. And so getting people, again, playing on their mobile devices, sharing content, making media, and then connecting it to all the other pieces out there so that, again, they can do more. One of the pieces we've been building, it's called Seeds the Game, teaches people how to grow food. We joke that it's worms with friends. This is the last company that I work with. It was the first company I founded with my husband, who's the gentleman right there. And we build special effects. We build wearable tech. And some of what the wearable tech we build includes social media. So for instance, with will.i.am in the Super Bowl, we built an LED helmet for him so it could send out messages. There are lots of different ways this can be done. For instance, Daft Punk's helmets, right? We designed those with LEDs, but they could also be sending messages as well. We're designing wearable tech that will include full video couture gowns. So at the end of the day, you can be wearing your show. And this is me. I welcome your questions. I welcome your social media comments. You're welcome to reach out to me on pretty much any site, Admiration, Instagram, Twitter, whatever works for you. Do we have time for a question, or how are we on time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. It would be great if there's any questions around the social integration pieces.
The analytics based on incorporating social media, have you been able to track any kind of increase in viewership because of it?
There are others who've done that research, Forrester especially, so you can pay $500 for a report, but yes. The short answer is the more you are able to open the doors to participation, people feel bonded to you. They want to tell their friends, did you see my Instagram on the show last week? Like those sorts of things get people excited about you. So if you're able to think about like, oh, here's a really lightweight way, and it's not just in news, and it's not just in reality shows, but there's lots of different ways that you can begin to weave in the social media, even if it's just into your streams on your website. Was there one more question back there? Yeah.
Have those tweets in that never know column where you're going to pick the one. How then does it integrate with the actual engineering and broadcast?
Right, so for the last two shows I worked with Keycode on, we used a tool called Vidigo, which allowed us to serve, it's basically the graphics server that takes the XML from Neverknow and creates the lower thirds from that. So full screen lower thirds were coming through Vidigo. And there's a handful of different ways to do that. All right, thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Evonne. That was awesome. Maybe give a big hand to her.